Hello, welcome back, and this week on War Mysteries we're looking into the mysterious Foo Fighters of World War II and beyond. So, UFOs, strange lights, flying orbs, glowing discs. Very famous photo of them. It's those.
Bombers.
You can ignore them.
Well, they're just white dots on a bit of paper, aren't they? Surely that's not what all of today's shows are.
Photos blown up from what it was. To be fair, film from the era is actually about 20 megapixels in its modern equivalent. So you'd think that they might be able to do a bit better than that.
Well,
so, strange lights travelling at extreme speed, always invisible to radar, spotted in all theatres of war. So, European and Pacific theatres, American, Japanese, German, French, British pilots all saw them. We're going to be focusing specifically on the 415th Night Fighter Squadron, which were in Dijon in France at the time, because their testimonies are widely considered to be the most accurate and complete.
American? They're American?
Yes, American. Give it a minute. To this day, there is no satisfactory explanation as to their original purpose, but theories range from experimental weapons to UFOs, alien visitation, hallucination. We're going to get into it all. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Are you ready?
I don't know, we can't hear them, so...
Let's get into it.
The term Foo Fighters originates from the 1940s comic strip Smokey Stover, and was coined by Flight Observation Officer Donald J. Myers of the 415th Night Fighter Squadron.
Smokey Stover, it's about a firefighter. For some reason they decided that the word feu, from French, foo, as they pronounced it, Foo Fighter, firefighter. Where there's foo, there's fire. That's what he used to say.
Okay.
Not really relevant.
In late 1944, Myers and his fellow crewmates, pilot Edward Schultes and intelligence officer Fred Ringwald, were flying their Bristol Beaufighter over the Rhine River on a night harassment mission to detect and intercept Axis bombers in the area.
Also trains, military facilities. So towards the Rhine, November 44, it's just before the Third Army pushes through to Bastogne.
It's actually called Night Harassment Mission.
Yeah, because obviously at this point in the war, the Rhine area was one of the main focal points of the German counterattack to sort of repel the Allied forces coming in. And these attacks were designed to disrupt and destroy industry in and around the area.
When flying north of Strasbourg, the crew spotted 8 to 10 bright orange lights to their port side, flying at very high speed. Radar and ground personnel could not locate nor identify the objects.
Approximately 200 mile an hour.
It's fast.
It's quite fast, although having said that, a lot of these Beaufighters were travelling 250 to 300 mile an hour on these missions anyway, because they were obviously high speed, rapid insertion. Radar and ground personnel could not locate or identify the objects, and they did check. So, having
Really
a fag,
fast.
outside having a fag probably.
Could have been slacking. Probably not though.
Cup of tea.
Where is it again? Sorry, this is in the area of the Rhine.
They're based in France, and they're flying over Germany.
Well, I suspect that.
Bored, reading the comics. Yeah, lads, got some lights off the port side here. What we can do about it? Not a lot. Nothing there.
As the pilot turned to intercept them, they quickly disappeared.
Just gone. They did reappear a little bit later on, much further away, but by that point they were out of range. Initially, they didn't actually report this either because they were worried. They were worried that it wouldn't be taken seriously. If they reported every strange thing that happened during the war, they'd be here a week.
On January 1st, 1945, a news article written by Robert C. Wilson, an Associated Press war correspondent attached to the 415th, was published in a variety of national newspapers. The article was given credence and lauded as a believable account because of the number of sightings recorded, the consistency of them, and the apparent impact on the crews involved.
A lot of these guys were coming back tired,
Knackered.
I mean, you're flying a loud, reasonably fast aircraft.
It'd be absolutely exhausting.
Hostile
It'd be
territory.
absolutely exhausting, wouldn't it?
Flak. And then all of a sudden, some joker turns up, turns his lights on. Alright lads, just here to annoy you.
Probably better if I just do the funnies.
The objects were described as star-like and of baseball to basketball in size.
I'm guessing.
Really?
Yeah,
That's quite small. Maybe they mean that's at a distance.
yeah, that's what I thought. Like looking out of a window at something. But it was popular back in the day to compare things to the size of a coin. Apparently, baseball went out.
Know nothing about baseball.
Yeah, me neither.
They seemed to move as if they were intelligently controlled, not randomly or without caution. Some pilots agreed that they flew as though directed by air currents or draft, created by their own aircraft.
It almost seems like they were being controlled by people.
Can be controlled by something.
Oh, little green men.
Probably not.
Yeah, probably not.
In almost all cases, Foo Fighters pursued, harassed, or behaved as if to distract the pilots that spotted them, but never initiated or participated in direct hostile action of any kind.
Just jokers then, you know, at this point. It's just flying around, making a nuisance.
I suppose the fact that they didn't attack just makes it all the creepier.
Very strange that they didn't make any kind of hostile action.
The appearance of these strange lights was not isolated to just the 415th Night Fighter Squadron. Reports were logged all over the Pacific by Japanese and American airmen, and in Europe by American, British, French, Canadian, and German forces. However, for the purposes of a timelined example, we will focus on the accounts of the 415th Night Fighter Squadron, based in Dijon in France in 1944. December 15th. Lieutenant Henry Giblin, the pilot, and Lieutenant Walter Cleary, a radar observer, saw a floating brilliant red light at 2,000 feet, travelling approximately 200 miles an hour, sighted in the vicinity of Erstein. December 18th. In the Rastatt area, we sighted 5 or 6 red and green lights in a T formation.
Now, that's quite important because some harassment squadrons in the Luftwaffe during the war would fly in this T formation to hide their numbers from the front. They may think that there were 2 or 3 aircraft approaching. Once they approached, they would peel off and there would be a column of aircraft, principally to attack bombers, but that could be significant.
Yeah, good.
One of their tactics.
Good way to conceal your numbers.
A bit like the Tuscan Raiders.
Yeah.
The objects followed us through turns and close to 1,000 feet of us. They then pursued us without gaining for several miles and went out. December 23rd. In the vicinity of Hagenau, we saw 2 orange lights coming towards us from the ground. Once at altitude, they pursued on our tail of our Beaufighter for around 2 minutes, then peeled off, flying away under perfect control, and went out.
That's the bit that got me. Perfect control. Again, suggests they're controlled by an intelligence as opposed to just a random occurrence of nature.
So kind of maintaining the same speed then, really.
Almost as though they were tracking them.
Later sighted 2 orange lights, one at 10,000 feet. The second climbed up and disappeared. December 24th. We observed a glowing red object shoot straight up. It changed suddenly into a plan view of an aircraft, doing a wing over and going into a dive. Then it disappeared. This appears to be the only suggestion of a controlled flying vehicle that was recognised.
It's the only suggestion that it performed any kind of manoeuvre that was observable, as opposed to just buzzing around and being annoying.
Like a wasp at a barbecue.
Yeah, I guess so.
Really annoying.
Just a light comes up, appears in front of them as though a plane.
Using it as an example.
That's Dusty, and just turns over and flies down. Quality construction. Let's let them see that. There you go. Get the old. Bang them off. December 24th, Christmas Eve. Bit harsh, isn't it?
Why?
Well, Christmas Eve.
No, they might not have been Christian.
The Foo Fighters completely disappeared when the Allied forces captured the area to the east of the Rhine, and seems to indicate a correlation.
Just stopped. Just vanished. stopped, gone, never came back, no more sightings during wartime. Perhaps to the east of the Rhine is where these weapons, objects, whatever they are, were coming from.
Oh, possible.
It's knackered. The area was known to be a focal point of many experimental German stations. Now, we mentioned those before, so there was the experimental works at Ebensee, Peenemünde, where the V2 was principally developed.
Have we got a picture of that? We have, look.
It's just in shot. So what could these objects have been? The first theory is that they are some kind of advanced German weapon. And obviously the Allies are pounding their industry to dust at this point.
Yeah, realising that a bit late, really.
Bit late.
Then I suppose they weren't worried, were they?
They still thought at this point that they could turn the tide, but they just flooded industry just to get them building missiles, tanks, rocketry.
Crazy things.
Yeah.
It's broadly understood that Nazi Germany invested heavily in experimental and bleeding edge technologies during the war, and specifically with respect to aircraft and airborne weaponry. As by 1944, it was becoming obvious to High Command that air superiority was vital to the defence of the fatherland. Experimental aircraft factories and facilities were indeed located within range of the areas of the sightings, such as the Mittelwerk factory near Ebensee, flying disc research facilities at Breslau, and the V2 works at Peenemünde. It's argued that any combination of the following could be responsible for the sightings.
So advanced chaff reflection, similar to window. Have you heard of window? The British.
I've heard of a window.
Thin. There was a form of chaff, so radar jamming, called window, which the British used. They dropped it from Lancasters and from Wellingtons. Thin strips of aluminium or tin, and it would confuse radar by producing multiple signatures. In theory, you could fly over a certain area with a couple of aircraft, drop all this chaff. The German radar defence network that was in place at the time would see suddenly a huge spike on the radar screens, and
it'll be a bit of a mess.
Yeah, cack their pants and send everything to intercept, metal bits. Whereas in actual fact, you would then divert your main force elsewhere, and you know that most of their air defence is occupied shooting down
the cases from mince pies.
Yeah, those little baskets that you get the background charts in. Repulsine type aircraft. So there was a gentleman named Victor Schauberger. He was captured, really. He was kind of forced by the SS to work for them. So he was a very famous air current and vortex scientist. I don't know what the correct term is. Air scientist.
Jet engine scientist?
Propulsion specialist. We'll go with that.
I don't think it's that.
It's definitely that. Air currents and water.
Oh, okay. It's air.
So this air scientist, he came up with an object or a craft known as the repulsine. Contra-rotating discs that would use air or fluid pressure to produce vortex energy, which would enable lift or propulsion.
Clever.
Very clever, yeah. Not actually sure what happened to him. I'm pretty sure he went over to the US with paperclip. Good old chap. So these repulsine aircraft could, in theory, float, levitate. Flak or high explosive artillery. That will produce a flash of light. Shells in particular will travel, so they will produce a contrail behind them, which could be misinterpreted.
On here, and it's quite clearly little flashes of light, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
Could it be the stars?
Bit big.
Distraction flares? Is that something?
You read the script again, didn't you? So distraction flares, high altitude bursts, usually instantaneous, but obviously flares can burn for a long period of time. Rocket powered aircraft such as the ME-163, little flying flea.
It's the Comet.
The Comet.
They're called, aren't they?
Yeah. Hold on. ME-163 Comet.
Cool little things.
Very fast, which satisfies the condition of speed. Very small and therefore very manoeuvrable. And also they produce a luminous vapour trail because they are a rocket engine.
Well, that was what it was then. Case closed.
Reckon we're done?
Yeah.
Sorted.
Case closed.
It's not, well. V1 or V2 experimental designs. There were a number of different prototypes they worked on.
It seems logical to suggest that the Foo Fighters were simply experimental vehicles, especially given the factual underpinnings surrounding them. These machines were actually on drawing boards and under construction, in some cases even in testing stages, during the period in question, and documentation including photographs exist to support this. However, there are several reasons why these are unlikely candidates. Chaff is used as an anti-radar device, and as such is definitively detected by radar scopes. No Foo Fighter sighting was ever corroborated by a radar signature.
So not a single encounter. They found them on a radar screen.
So it's all eyewitness stuff.
All eyewitness.
It's all the guys seeing it out of, I suppose, the pilots or gunners, I guess, in bombers.
Yeah, radar observers. I mean, they even had the radar on the aircraft themselves at the time. And obviously the radar observers saw nothing. Add to that the fact that these are isolated testimonies, so groups of people in an enclosed team on the aircraft, they only have each other to corroborate their stories independently. There's no outside observation, because no one else has seen them.
Repulsine aircraft were definitely in the design and experimentation stages in late 1944, but there have been no prototypes recovered that could demonstrate flight. Flak shells are accompanied by a loud, audible report as they are launched, and the experienced pilots would certainly have detected this.
Yeah, definitely. Boom! Yeah, you're not gonna be mistaken flak. Really, I wouldn't have thought. Pretty weak excuse.
As noted by 415th Night Fighter officers, distraction flares can be affected by wind, but they don't turn, they don't peel off, and they don't change direction intelligently. Nor have I ever seen one that can accelerate to 200 mph plus.
Seems pretty logical to me. 200 mph flares just doesn't happen unless you're flying through a...
Sorry.
What happened?
I was preparing something that I found for this week.
Preparing something? You've done
bit of
some
my own
research, you've done
research
some independent research, have you? Okay.
So we'll get that out soon.
Mm.
So I wasn't really listening to the last bit.
It's fine. Yeah, it's just the whole point.
What are we talking about, full stop?
Me-163 rocket aircraft were specifically designed to be used during daytime operations against bombers, starting July 28th of 1944. While the timeline does suggest the 163 was available, and within range, night flying was considered far too dangerous, owing to its unstable fuel and complicated landing procedure.
I've actually looked into the service record of the 163 from sort of mid-1944 onwards, when they were properly deployed. I think it was May they first saw action.
Too little, too late.
Yeah, their survivability record was shocking. They would explode in flight, they would explode on landing, they used horrendously unstable fuel. They were really, really dangerous aircraft to fly, and to do so at night would be ridiculous. It's just such a huge risk. And during the last part of their flight, they're a glider.
You'd have to be a madman. Or a Nazi.
Most likely.
Jet-powered aircraft of the time did not produce any visible exhaust flame, and therefore could not have been responsible for the sightings, unless intentionally fitted with powerful lamps and no armament, as they did not attack. This would seem very counterproductive.
There was one theory. If they were intentionally fitted with lamps, powerful lamps, the idea is that they would fly close to these formations just to harass them, just to distract them from their target, maybe get them to pursue. But it just seems very unlikely, because if they were to send up these highly advanced aircraft, which they could be using in the daytime to combat bombers, no armament, it just seems counterproductive.
V1 and V2 weapons were specifically targeted at populated areas.
Yeah, definitely. You're not going to be just launching these willy-nilly. They're going to be going, right, you're going to London.
Hull.
Probably not Hull.
Give them one anyway. Cleethorpes.
Why Cleethorpes? I don't even know where that is. So.
It's near Hull.
Is it?
Yep.
You ever been there?
Up into Hull.
You've been to Hull. What's Hull like?
It's a dump.
And while these missiles were capable of reaching the required speeds, they were not remotely controlled in any way.
So vehicles are not particularly likely. They can't satisfy all the conditions of what these things were. So, that's them light out. Those. Learning. So theory number 2, atmospheric phenomena.
Certain atmospheric effects and behaviours may have been evident to pilots during their aerial missions. Some of these are able to produce luminous and observable phenomena, such as light or perceived motion. These include St. Elmo's fire, an emissive phenomenon that occurs when a solid object passes through a charged fluid medium at high speed and angle of attack. This can be seen at night specifically, as St. Elmo's fire is luminous and glows red when particles are positively charged, and blue when negatively charged. This is mostly visible on wingtips or protrusions on aircraft flying through storms, especially at higher velocities.
Now, there were sightings of blue and red orbs. Now, yeah, they were flying fast, and therefore it's possible, and it would seem to chase the aircraft.
Ball lightning, a peculiar effect thought to be high-energy plasmatic media, such as bead lightning, but that is many orders of magnitude more potent. The exact scientific processes of its formation, and the mechanism by which it is able to subsist for minutes at a time, are not known.
Bead lightning, basically clusters of charged particles. You can see it in the aftermath of a lightning strike if you play it back on some slow motion video, but they only survive for a number of milliseconds.
So is that after the lightning's gone?
Yeah, you watch a bolt come down afterwards, sometimes you will see that the bolt seems to kind of disintegrate into these smaller parts.
Is it worth cutting away to a picture of that?
Possibly. There's a little diagram of... That's their idea. Disturbed dust or other particles. Ionising radiation forms around and it turns into a plasmatic medium. Ball lightning is very, very strange.
Quite, confusing. Is this the ground?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not a particularly easy subject to...
Put this in, no, let's put that
You're going to hide that one, that's fine. So they really don't know how it works, they don't know the mechanism by which it is formed, they don't know how it happens, and there's not enough documented cases.
So the suggestion being the pilots have to be fairly lucky, I guess, look out the window and catch for this fraction of a second or whatever it is, this phenomena.
Aurora. High altitude atmospheric disturbances caused by interaction between high energy charged rays emitted by the sun and the Earth's atmosphere. Electrons in the atmosphere move to a higher energy state during collision, and then back to a lower energy state. During this latter process, the electrons emit photons. As with the experimental aircraft, these seem perfectly sound explanations until they are scrutinised against known Foo Fighter traits. St. Elmo's fire is a well-documented phenomenon.
And a good film.
Particularly in the postmodern world, and as such, pilots of the era would likely have been aware of it. This suggestion also does not explain how the lights were able to move independently and at a distance from the aircraft.
So, I mean, a lot of these sightings, they're saying it's, 1,000 feet away or it's following them. So they just don't know.
Ball lightning is, by contrast, an extremely poorly understood force of nature, and documented encounters with it are extraordinarily rare. By virtue of this, it's impossible to attribute such an immeasurable and unpredictable occurrence to measurable and frequent sightings.
Not surprising, really.
Well, exactly.
It's the last millisecond of a lightning strike.
Yeah, it's suggested that ball lightning can survive for longer, but nobody seems to have a camera around at the time, so... Which basically means that it's very, very, very unlikely that such a concentrated series of events would have occurred of ball lightning, and then just to stop.
How unlikely out of 100? Does it say? What do you think?
It doesn't say. No. Nearly impossible, given that there are probably a handful of encounters that are documented since then.
That wasn't out of 100.
Aurora are very recognisable, and frequently encountered at the poles, but extremely rarely in equatorial areas.
That's common sense, really. So, probably not anything atmospheric. Theory 3. Trauma.
Naturally, pilots in warfare encounter traumatic experiences. They're witness to death, mutilation by weapons fire, sudden high-impact violence, and the possibility of an inescapable fate should their aircraft be damaged beyond its ability to remain airborne.
That must be a terrifying thing to experience anyway.
It's a long way of saying crash.
Basically, yeah. It's night time. These guys are knackered. They're probably at their wits' end. You know, the war's been going on now for some of them for 4 or 5 years, almost constant conflict. They're perhaps wondering, you know, when it's going to end.
Definitely.
Well, it can't have been a nice thing to experience, can it? You know, flying at night, loud engines all around you.
I mean, you make the best of it, wouldn't you?
How would you do that? But you're up there in your Beaufighter, got some guy behind you. Hey Matt, there's some funky ass lights out there. What do you make of them?
So your question's irrelevant.
While not particularly well recognised at the time, post-traumatic stress disorder, perhaps known as shell shock or battle fatigue contemporarily, would certainly have been a contributing factor to the psychological burden of many pilots. The constant threat of harm and death is a condition that could persist in the subconscious for only a certain length of time before manifesting, and would doubtless have led to incidents of mental instability and loss of awareness. This would certainly have been worsened by the intense fatigue brought on by persistent attacks. It's been suggested that these objects may in fact have been hallucinatory in nature, though the members of the 415th Night Fighter Squadron adamantly refute this.
So, when the article was published in January, a lot of the other press agencies thought, well, that's a load of rubbish. They're just hallucinating, not been sleeping well. Nah, you're making it up, you know, glorifying stories of flares.
Upon hearing that some of the press agencies viewed the Foo Fighters as hallucinations and figments of imagination, one pilot commented, "They absolutely scared us shitless. We saw what we saw. Those sons of bitches will come over here and fly with us, I'll show them myself."
Adamant.
It's pretty, yeah, that's pretty, you know, pretty definite. These guys are fighting for their country.
I think even before we get to theory 4, my money's on hallucinating. On the trauma, yeah. That's where it is. None of this atmospheric nonsense or weapons or anything like that. They were just tripping.
But to be fair, the German pilots, before they went into heavy battles that they knew there was going to be a high attrition rate, they were actually issued little boxes of, I can't remember what they called it, flight powder or something. It was basically meth to keep them sharp and on their senses.
Okay.
So a lot of them were actually meth addicts by the end of the war. And that is if they didn't get, you know, shot down and died in a field or something.
You can't be addicted to something when you're dead.
It's good advice. So could it be psychological? Possibly. We'll look into what we think in a little while. Final theory is objects of extraterrestrial origin. A less supported proposal, but one that has gained significant traction among conspiracy theorists, is that Foo Fighters could be extraterrestrial in origin. You can see what I've written about this one. You know, fair representation and all that, but quite frankly, I think it's dog shit.
Citing various other alleged evidence of visitation, including unexplained events such as the Roswell incident of July 1947, the Tunguska explosion of June 30th, 1908, the appearance of the Black Knight satellite, and the Rendlesham event in December of 1980, it's argued that the Foo Fighters defy logical explanation precisely because they are born of a technology unknown to us, and must therefore be categorised as alien by nature. No empirical evidence is available to confirm or deny this theory, since there have never been any irrefutable cases of such a phenomenon.
I don't know as much about that.
Rendlesham was it was an American military base of some kind. It's down in southern England somewhere. December 1980, lights were seen floating over a forest nearby, Rendlesham Forest, and there was a crash and an explosion. And they sent men out to look. There's conflicting reports after that point about what actually happened. So some of them were saying that they encountered beings and communicated in with sign language. You know, maybe
I can see my breath out here, by the way, at the minute.
This is what happened. Well, you told me to turn the heater off. It's argued that Foo Fighters defy logical explanation precisely because they are born out of a technology unknown to us.
Makes sense.
It does make sense. I mean, to be fair, if you know people in the 40s, if they'd seen this thing flying around, they'd probably have thought that the Martians had come.
Shit their pants.
I know that I would. That wouldn't be a nice thing to see in the sky. And obviously, War of the Worlds was around the same kind of time, and you saw what kind of hysteria that caused. So
Mass
hysteria. So what do you reckon?
Well, I think that looks like a Pokemon ball.
Okay, it's definitely not Pokeballs flying around.
I'm going to stick with my original theory, which is...
Some kind of trauma.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it's true, they did experience a lot of traumatic events, particularly being such a long war. I mean, a lot of these guys would have been returning to war. But I originally was erring on the side of advanced weaponry. Knowing what I do about aircraft of that time, planes like the Arado 234 jet bomber, which were used in reconnaissance roles, they were very, very fast. And this is during a period in the war when the Allies hadn't really made much traction with jet engine weapons or anything like that.
No, we were a bit behind with it all, weren't we?
Yeah,
really?
I mean, until the Gloucester Meteor arrived, shortly before the ME-262 was operational, we didn't really have any kind of jet aircraft. But then, thinking about it, perhaps it is more logical that they were just knackered, lack of sleep, rubbish food.
I'm knackered.
So, psychological trauma it is, I think. Starting to know what that feels like myself.
Perhaps best supported is the theory that these pilots, and indeed all personnel involved in the conflict, were suffering from the intense impact of their environment and wartime engagements. Many of these people would be experiencing prolonged combat for the first time during World War II, facing a determined and embittered enemy. This is especially true of the 415th Squadron discussed. Whether described as hallucinations, byproducts of sleep deprivation, manifestations of extended high stress levels, or simply misinterpreted optical illusions, the most likely explanation for these mysterious objects is that they were a defensive coping mechanism developed in response to extended trauma. The idea may have propagated because of the atmosphere of camaraderie found in the company of others. However, it cannot be ruled out entirely that these strange objects were not some advanced weapon deployed by the Germans, and by extension, the Japanese, since there is evidence of collaboration between the two powers. Perhaps German High Command deemed it necessary to inform its personnel on a need-to-know basis, which would explain why little to no documentation exists, and why no one alive can testify to the existence of such technology, or indeed its present location. As such, the true nature of the Foo Fighters and their ultimate purpose will likely remain unknown.
Makeup!
There is no makeup. Another one busted. So what are we going to do with this then? Where do you want to put that?
That'll go on the wall.
On the old wall? Where are you going to put it?
I don't know, on the wall somewhere over there. We'll see. Probably not there, no. No, that's... oh dear. Up there. Is that on the set? I don't know.
No, it's
we'll
not.
Find somewhere to put
Not
it.
in
The
shot.
set is being is improving slowly.
I mean, even in this day and age, that's a radical design, really, isn't it?
Stop picking it up.
I like picking it up. So yeah. Not aliens. Couldn't have been, could it really?